The Seattle rain had a way of making everything feel like a secret. That Tuesday morning, I stepped out of my apartment on Capitol Hill and pulled my hood up against the drizzle, already running 5 minutes behind. It had been 4 months since my mother passed, and I was still learning how to exist in a city where I knew almost no one. I'd taken the nursing job at Harborview because I needed a reset, a place with no memories of her voice echoing down the hallway, no kitchen that smelled like her lavender hand cream, no couch where she used to fall asleep watching Jeopardy with the volume too loud. Seattle was supposed to be my blank page. My walk to the hospital took me through Cal Anderson Park every morning. It was the one part of my routine I actually liked: the old trees dripping with rain, the joggers circling the reservoir, the quiet hum of a city waking up. And every single morning, sitting on the same bench near the south entrance, was the old man. I didn't know his name at first. He was thin, early 70s maybe, always wearing the same olive-green jacket that looked like it had been through 2 decades of Pacific Northwest weather. His face was weathered but calm, and he sat with a stillness that made him almost invisible to most people walking by. He never asked anyone for money. He never spoke to anyone at all. He just sat there, watching. I started buying an extra coffee from the cart near the park entrance. The first time I set it down beside him, he looked up at me with pale gray eyes and said nothing, just nodded. The second time, he offered a quiet thank you. By the third week, we had a rhythm. I'd hand him the cup, he'd nod, sometimes we'd exchange a sentence or two about the weather or the ducks near the fountain. His name was Arthur. That was all I knew. Until the morning, everything changed. I was running late again, half jogging through the park with my bag bouncing against my hip, when Arthur stood up from the bench. He'd never done that before. He stepped directly into my path, and the look on his face stopped me cold. His eyes were wide, his jaw tight, and his hands, usually so still, were trembling. "Don't drink anything from the third-floor break room," he said. I blinked. "What?" He reached out and gripped my forearm, his fingers cold and surprisingly strong. "The water. The coffee. Don't touch any of it. Not today. Not until you hear from me again." "Arthur, what are you talking about?" He glanced over my shoulder, then back at me, and his voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Please. Just trust me on this. I can't explain everything right now, but you need to listen." "Will you listen?" The rain picked up around us. A jogger passed without a second glance. I stood there, staring at this frail old man who had never said more than 10 words to me at a time, now gripping my arm like he was afraid I might vanish. "Okay," I said slowly. "Okay, I won't." He released my arm and sat back down, his shoulders curling inward as if the effort had drained him. I opened my mouth to ask more, but he shook his head and looked away. Whatever he had to say, that was all he was willing to give me right now. I walked the rest of the way to Harborview with my heart drumming against my ribs. It was absurd. The third-floor break room. I worked on the 3rd floor. I used that break room every single day: coffee in the morning, water throughout my shift, sometimes the vending machine soup when I didn't have time for a real lunch. What could possibly be wrong with it? By the time I badged through the staff entrance, I'd almost convinced myself Arthur was confused. Maybe early dementia, maybe just a bad morning. People on the street sometimes said strange things. It didn't have to mean anything. But I didn't get coffee from the break room. I filled my water bottle from the fountain on the 2nd floor instead, telling myself it was just a precaution, not paranoia. Then I clocked in and started my shift on the cardiac step-down unit, checking vitals, administering meds, updating charts. Normal, familiar, steady work. The kind of work that kept my hands busy and my mind quiet. Except nothing felt quiet that morning. I noticed it first during rounds. Mrs. Yamamoto in room 312 post-op, recovering well yesterday, suddenly nauseous and disoriented. The attending adjusted her meds, assumed it was a reaction. Then Mr. Brennan in 318 stable for 3 days, now complaining of severe stomach cramps and blurred vision. 2 patients in one morning with sudden, unexplained symptoms on the same floor. I mentioned it to my charge nurse, Diane. She frowned, made a note, and told me to keep monitoring. "Probably just a coincidence," she said. Flu season's wrapping up, but you never know. By lunch, a third patient had spiked a fever that didn't match any of his lab work. I sat in the hallway outside his room, staring at my water bottle, and Arthur's voice played through my head on a loop. Don't drink anything from the third-floor break room. I pulled out my phone and texted my friend Kira, who worked in the ER downstairs. Hey, weird question. Have you seen any unusual admissions today? Sudden GI symptoms, unexplained nausea? Her reply came 20 minutes later. Actually, yeah. 2 transfers from your floor this morning. Why? I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. After my shift, I walked back through Cal Anderson Park. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still heavy and gray, the kind of overcast that makes Seattle feel like it's holding its breath. Arthur was on his bench. When he saw me coming, he sat up straighter. I sat down beside him. 3 patients got sick today, I said quietly. All on my floor. All sudden onset, no clear cause. He closed his eyes. It's worse than I thought. Arthur, you need to tell me what's going on. He was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small plastic bag, the kind you'd get at a pharmacy, containing 3 tiny glass vials. Each one held a residue of something clear, barely visible. I found these, he said, in the trash behind the loading dock. 2 weeks ago. I stared at the vials. Found them how? He looked at me, and something in his expression cracked open: shame, exhaustion, grief, all tangled together. I sleep behind the loading dock sometimes. When the shelters are full, there's a vent there that pushes warm air out, and the security cameras don't cover that corner. He paused, collecting himself. I heard someone back there one night. 2 people. Talking in low voices. One of them was a man I'd seen going in and out of the hospital in scrubs. The other was in a suit. I stayed behind the dumpster and listened. My skin went cold. What did they say? The one in scrubs said something about dosing being adjusted. He said the formula was metabolized too quickly, that the symptoms were showing up faster than expected. The suit told him to slow it down, stretch it out longer, make it look more like natural deterioration. Arthur's hands were shaking again. He set the bag on the bench between us. After they left, I checked the trash. Found those. I don't know exactly what's in them, but I know what I heard, and I know what it sounded like. His voice dropped. It sounded like they were poisoning people. And I think they've been doing it for a while. I couldn't breathe. The park, the bench, the wet pavement beneath my shoes, everything blurred. My mind went to Mrs. Yamamoto's sudden nausea, Mr. Brennan's stomach cramps, the unexplained fever. I thought about the break room, the coffee pot, the water dispenser, the communal fridge. The break room, I whispered. Arthur nodded slowly. I think that's how they're doing it. Something in the water supply or the coffee. Something that wouldn't show up in standard labs unless someone knew to look for it. I pressed my hands against my knees to stop them from shaking. Arthur, we need to go to the police. I tried. His voice was flat, hollow. 3 days ago. I walked into the precinct on Cherry Street and told them what I heard. You know what they did? They took my name, wrote something on a notepad, and told me they'd follow up. Nobody followed up. Nobody ever follows up when you look like me. The bitterness in his words wasn't directed at me. It was the kind of bitterness that came from years of being invisible. Then I need to tell someone at the hospital, I said. Be careful who you tell. Arthur looked at me hard. The man in scrubs, I've seen him on your floor. Tall, dark hair, narrow face, he wears a lanyard with a blue badge. My stomach dropped. That description matched exactly one person. Marcus Holt, the pharmacy technician who serviced the third-floor medication carts. I barely slept that night. My apartment on Capitol Hill had never felt so small, so exposed. Every sound in the hallway made me flinch: a neighbor's door closing, the elevator humming, the building's old pipes groaning through the walls. I lay in bed, running through everything Arthur had told me, trying to find a hole in his story, a reason not to believe him. But everything aligned. The vials, the symptoms, the timing, Marcus Holt's access to the floor. The next morning, I did 2 things. First, I stopped at the park and told Arthur I believed him and that I was going to handle this, but carefully. He grabbed my hand and squeezed it just once, hard, and said, "Be safe. These people don't play nice when they're cornered." Second, I called Kira and asked her to meet me during her break. We sat in her car in the parking garage, engine off, rain tapping on the roof. "I need you to help me with something," I said. "And I need you not to think I'm crazy." "You're scaring me," Kira said. I told her everything. Arthur's warning, the vials, the overheard conversation, the pattern of patient symptoms. Kira listened without interrupting, her face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and then something harder, the focused intensity of someone who spent her days in an emergency room and understood what unexplained symptoms could really mean. "If there's a contaminant in the break room supply," she said slowly, "we can test for it. I know a toxicology tech in the lab. She owes me a favor. Can you trust her? With my life?" By that afternoon, Kira had quietly collected water samples from the third-floor break room, the coffee pot, the water dispenser, the faucet. She labeled them as routine environmental samples and passed them to her contact, a woman named Priya in the toxicology department. The results came back 26 hours later. Kira called me at 11 at night. Her voice was shaking. "Ethylene glycol," she said. "Low concentration, but consistent across all 3 samples. Someone has been adding antifreeze to the water supply on your floor." The room spun. I sat down on the edge of my bed, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. "The concentration was low enough that it wouldn't kill someone immediately," Kira continued. "But over days, weeks, repeated exposure, it would cause progressive kidney damage. Nausea, confusion, organ failure that would look like natural deterioration in patients who were already compromised." My mind raced to every patient who had declined unexpectedly in the past month. Every chart note that read "cause unclear." Every family member who had been told sometimes recovery just doesn't go the way we hope. "How many?" I whispered. "I don't know yet. But if this has been going on for more than a few weeks, it could be a lot of people." I didn't cry. I wanted to, but the anger was louder. Someone, Marcus Holt, or whoever he was working with, had been slowly poisoning vulnerable people in a hospital. People who came there to heal. People who trusted us with their lives. "We need to go to the police," I said. "Agreed. But not the local precinct, this needs to go higher." Kira knew a detective through her ex-boyfriend's family, a woman named Detective Carla Medina, who worked in the Seattle PD's Major Crimes Unit. We called her the next morning. Medina was sharp, direct, and took us seriously from the first sentence. We met her at a nondescript office near Pioneer Square. She wore a gray blazer and no-nonsense expression, and she listened to everything: my account, Kira's lab results, Arthur's testimony about the overheard conversation, without once making us feel like we were wasting her time. "You did the right thing coming to me," she said when we finished. "And you did the right thing being careful about who you told inside the hospital." She leaned forward. "Here's what I need you to understand. If what you're describing is accurate, this isn't just a crime. It's a serial crime, potentially spanning weeks or months, with multiple victims who may not even know they've been harmed. The people responsible will be desperate to keep this hidden." She looked directly at me. "Which means you could be in danger. Both of you." Kira reached over and grabbed my hand. "I'm going to coordinate with the hospital's compliance office and the state health department," Medina continued. "Simultaneously, I'm going to request surveillance footage from your floor, subpoena pharmacy access logs, and bring in Arthur for a formal statement. His testimony about the vials and the conversation he overheard is going to be critical." She paused. "In the meantime, I need you to go to work like nothing has changed. Don't confront anyone. Don't act differently around Marcus Holt. Can you do that?" I nodded, even though my hands were trembling under the table. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I went to work, smiled at my colleagues, checked on my patients, and avoided the third-floor break room entirely. I brought my own water, my own coffee, my own food. A few nurses noticed and teased me about it. Going full health nut on us? And I laughed it off. Meanwhile, every time Marcus Holt walked past me pushing the medication cart, my heart hammered so hard I was sure he could hear it. On the third day, Medina called me during my lunch break. "We pulled the pharmacy logs," she said. "Marcus Holt accessed the third-floor supply room 47 times in the past 6 weeks. The average for a technician covering that floor is 12. I gripped the phone. We also reviewed surveillance footage. On at least 9 occasions, he was recorded entering the break room after hours between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. when no other staff were present. He carried a small duffel bag each time." "That's him," I breathed. "That's the proof. It's part of it. There's more." Medina's voice tightened. "The man in the suit that Arthur described, we identified him through hospital visitor logs. His name is Gerald Price. He's the regional director of a company called Alder Health Partners. I've never heard of them. Most people haven't. They're a healthcare management group that holds partial financial interest in several hospitals in the Pacific Northwest, including Harborview. When a patient dies or requires extended critical care, the billing structures shift in ways that benefit companies like Alder." The implication hit me like a wall of ice. They were profiting from it. We believe so. Slow patient deterioration means longer stays, more procedures, more billing codes. If the decline looks natural, no one investigates. It's invisible profit built on human suffering. I thought I might be sick. Kira, sitting beside me, read my face and mouthed, "What?" I shook my head. I couldn't say the words out loud yet. The arrests happened early on a Thursday morning. Medina had coordinated with the FBI's Healthcare Fraud Division, the Washington State Department of Health, and Hospital Security. It was surgical, quiet, and devastating. Marcus Holt was taken into custody at his apartment in Beacon Hill at 5:47 a.m. He didn't resist. According to Medina, he sat on his couch and stared at the wall while officers cataloged the contents of his kitchen, including a half-empty jug of antifreeze stored under the sink with the label peeled off. Gerald Price was arrested at his office in Bellevue 3 hours later. He was less cooperative. His attorney arrived within minutes, but the warrant was airtight. Agents seized computers, financial records, and communications that detailed the entire arrangement payments to Holt, projected cost savings from patient outcomes, and a paper trail that stretched across 4 hospitals. 2 other employees at Harborview, an administrative coordinator, and a night shift supervisor who had helped cover Holt's after-hours access, were also arrested. Both cooperated almost immediately, confirming what Medina's team had already pieced together. When Medina called me that afternoon, I was sitting in Kira's car in the hospital parking garage. My shift had ended an hour ago, but I couldn't bring myself to drive. "It's done," she said. "All 4 are in custody. Price is facing federal charges, healthcare fraud, conspiracy, multiple counts of assault. Holt is looking at attempted murder charges for at least 11 patients we've identified so far." 11. The number echoed in my head. 11 people whose suffering had been manufactured for profit. "You saved lives," Medina said quietly. "You and your friend, and that old man in the park. You all saved lives." I hung up the phone and finally cried. Not out of relief, exactly. Out of everything: the fear, the fury, the grief for patients I couldn't go back in time to protect, and the overwhelming weight of knowing how close it had all come to never being discovered. After the arrests, the hospital launched a full internal review. Every patient who had been treated on the 3rd floor in the past 3 months was re-evaluated. Families were notified. Counseling was offered. The break room was gutted and rebuilt. New security protocols were implemented for pharmacy access, after-hours entry, and supply chain monitoring. I took a leave of absence. I needed space from the fluorescent lights, the chart notes, the hallways where I now saw ghosts of what had happened behind closed doors. Kira covered for me without hesitation, and Medina checked in every few days, making sure I was okay, making sure no one from Price's network tried to contact me. But the person I thought about most was Arthur. I went back to the park on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after the arrests. The bench was empty. I sat there for an hour, watching the joggers and the ducks, waiting. He didn't come. I came back the next day, and the next. Empty. On the fourth day, I went to the shelter on 2nd Avenue, the one closest to the park. A volunteer behind the front desk, a young guy with kind eyes, and a name tag that read Danny recognized Arthur's description immediately. "Arthur Calloway," he said. "Yeah, he's been coming in more often." "Hold on, I think he's in the dining area." I followed Danny through a narrow hallway that smelled like disinfectant and canned soup. And there he was sitting at a folding table with a styrofoam bowl of oatmeal, his olive jacket draped over the back of his chair. He looked thinner than the last time I'd seen him, but his eyes were clear. When he saw me, he smiled. Not a big smile, Arthur didn't do big smiles, but a real one. "Heard it on the news," he said, as I sat down across from him. "They got them." "They got them," I said. "Because of you." He shook his head. "Because of you." I was just an old man nobody listened to. I listened. He looked at me for a long time, and something in his expression softened in a way I hadn't seen before, not gratitude exactly, but recognition. Like he was finally allowing himself to believe that his words had mattered. I asked him about his life, really asked, for the first time. It came out slowly, in fragments. Arthur had been an accountant, a good one, for a mid-size firm in Tacoma. His wife had died of ovarian cancer 12 years ago. The medical bills drained his savings. He lost the house, then the job, then the will to start over. He had a daughter, Claire, but they'd had a falling out years ago. She'd told him to get help. He'd told her to mind her own business. They hadn't spoken since. "I think about her every day," he said, his voice cracking. "Every single day." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "Would you want to find her?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at our hands, his weathered and scarred, mine still carrying the faint smell of hospital soap. "I'm scared she won't want to see me," he said. "And if she does?" He closed his eyes. "Then I've wasted a lot of years being afraid." I spent the next 2 weeks making calls, writing emails, and using every resource Medina could point me toward. Arthur had given me Claire's maiden name and the last city he knew she lived in, Spokane. From there, it was a slow chain of public records, social media searches, and one very helpful woman at a community center who said, "Oh, Claire? She volunteers here every Tuesday." When I finally reached Claire Calloway Rivera on the phone, her voice went completely silent for 10 seconds after I told her who I was and why I was calling. "He's alive?" she whispered. "He's alive. He's in Seattle. And he wants to see you." She was on a plane the next morning. But before the reunion, I had one more thing to take care of. I'd been researching care facilities for weeks, and I'd found one that felt right, a place called Cedar Ridge, a senior-assisted living home in a quiet neighborhood in North Seattle. It had a small garden with raised beds, a reading room with floor-to-ceiling windows, a weekly movie night, and a staff that actually seemed to care. They had a room available. I filled out the paperwork myself, using a combination of the hospital's Victim Assistance Fund and a state program for displaced seniors that Medina had helped me locate. Arthur resisted at first. "I'm not charity," he said, sitting on his usual bench in the park. "You're not charity," I said. "You're a witness in a federal case who helped expose a criminal conspiracy. There are programs specifically for people like you, and you're going to let me help you access them because you deserve to sleep somewhere warm." He looked at me with those pale gray eyes, and for the first time, I saw them fill with tears. He moved into Cedar Ridge on a Wednesday. The room was small but sunny, with a quilt on the bed and a window that looked out onto the garden. He stood in the doorway for a full minute, not moving, just looking. "This is mine?" he asked. "This is yours." Claire arrived 2 days later. I met her in the lobby of Cedar Ridge. She was in her early 40s, dark-haired, with her father's gray eyes, and the nervous energy of someone who had rehearsed 1,000 versions of this moment without knowing which one would come out. "I don't know what to say to him," she admitted, twisting the strap of her purse. "What do you say to someone you gave up on?" "You don't have to say anything perfect," I told her. "You just have to show up." I walked her to his room and waited in the hallway. Through the half-open door, I heard Claire's voice, small and trembling. "Dad?" A silence. Then Arthur's voice, thick and broken. "Baby girl." I heard the sound of footsteps, then crying, the deep, shaking kind that comes from years of held-back grief finally releasing. I stepped away from the door to give them space, pressing my back against the hallway wall, my own eyes burning. When I came back 20 minutes later, they were sitting side by side on the bed, Claire's head resting on Arthur's shoulder. His arm was around her, trembling but steady. She looked up at me with red eyes and said, "Thank you. Thank you for giving him back to me." Arthur met my gaze over his daughter's head. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The weeks that followed were the most peaceful I'd experienced since moving to Seattle. I went back to work slowly, carefully, on a floor that had been rebuilt from the inside out. The patients were new, the protocols were stronger, and the air in the break room no longer carried the invisible weight of what had happened there. It would take time. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight. But the work still mattered, and I still loved it. The trial came in the fall. King County Superior Court, a Tuesday morning with rain streaking the tall courthouse windows. I testified for 3 hours, steady, clear, and unafraid. I told them about Arthur's warning, about the vials, about the lab results, about the patients whose charts I'd reviewed and whose suffering now had an explanation they'd never been given. Marcus Holt was convicted of 11 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly substance, conspiracy, and 1 count of second-degree murder after a patient named Dolores Freeman, 78 years old, grandmother of 4, was determined to have died as a direct result of prolonged ethylene glycol exposure. He was sentenced to 34 years. Gerald Price was convicted on federal healthcare fraud charges, conspiracy, and multiple counts of assault. His sentence was 28 years, with no possibility of early release. The 2 hospital employees who had facilitated Holt's access cooperated fully and received reduced sentences 8 and 6 years respectively. When the verdicts were read, I sat in the gallery between Kira and Claire. Arthur wasn't there. His health had declined slightly, and the doctors at Cedar Ridge advised against the stress of a courtroom, but Claire held up her phone so he could listen in real time. I heard his breathing on the other end of the line, quiet and steady, and when the judge announced Price's sentence, I heard him exhale long, slow, final. It was over. I visited Arthur at Cedar Ridge that evening. He was sitting in the garden, wrapped in a new wool cardigan Claire had bought him, watching the last daylight fade behind the trees. His color was better. He'd gained weight. The tremor in his hands had eased now that he was eating regularly and sleeping in a real bed. He'd joined the facility's book club mystery novels, naturally, and had made friends with a retired postal worker named George, who shared his quiet humor and stubborn opinions about coffee. "Claire's coming this weekend," he told me, smiling. "She's bringing the grandkids." "Grandkids?" "2 of them, a boy and a girl. 7 and 4. His eyes shone. "I've never met them." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "You're going to be a great grandfather." He laughed a real laugh, warm and full, the kind I'd never heard from him before. "I'm going to spoil them rotten, is what I'm going to do." That night, I walked home through Cal Anderson Park. The bench where Arthur used to sit was empty, and for once, that didn't make me sad. The air was cool and clean, carrying the faint smell of wet cedar and the distant hum of the city settling into evening. I stopped at the edge of the reservoir and looked up. The clouds had parted just enough to reveal a thin ribbon of stars rare in Seattle, almost impossible, and I stood there, breathing it in. 4 months ago, I had come to this city with nothing but grief and a suitcase. I had walked through this park every morning feeling hollow, untethered, like a person shaped around an absence. I had given a cup of coffee to a stranger because it was the only kind thing I knew how to do. And that stranger had saved my life. Not literally, not the way I had helped save his. But in the way that mattered most, he had given me a reason to pay attention, to trust my instincts, to act when everything in me wanted to look away. He had reminded me that courage doesn't always look like courage. Sometimes it looks like a trembling hand and a whispered warning from someone the world forgot to see. I took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill my lungs, and I kept walking. Not away from anything. Not toward anything specific, just forward, steady, and unafraid. I was healing. I was whole. And for the first time in a very long time, I was home.